3 weeks ago, America was the undisputed ruler of the world, the most powerful military in human history, the anchor of the global financial system, the technological superpower that every nation on Earth either feared, followed, or both. And then, on February 28th, Donald Trump launched Operation Epic Fury, and today, America's closest allies are publicly condemning its war. China is filling the diplomatic vacuum Washington just abandoned. Russia is repositioning as the world's indispensable mediator. The global South is watching and choosing sides. And the institutional architecture that took the United States 80 years to build, the alliances, the credibility, the moral authority, is cracking under the weight of a war with no legal authorization, no clear endgame, and a civilian death toll that the world can no longer ignore. This is not just a war in the Middle East. This is the moment the world stops trusting America. And it is happening faster than anyone in Washington is willing to admit. Welcome. Subscribe right now, because what we are covering today is the most consequential strategic story of this entire war. Not the bombs, not the oil prices, the deeper wound, the one that bleeds long after the guns go quiet. Let's go. Let's start with America's allies, because the fracture inside the Western alliance right now is not a disagreement between friends, it is a rupture. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, stood before Parliament and said he does not believe in regime change from the skies. He deployed British forces, but only in a defensive capacity, intercepting missiles over Cyprus, Jordan, and Iraq. He has refused to authorize offensive participation. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz visited the White House and pressed Trump directly for an endgame. He did not get one. France sent its aircraft carrier strike group toward the Mediterranean, but President Macron simultaneously called for an immediate ceasefire and warned that this conflict threatens the entire architecture of international order. Spain called the operation an extraordinary mistake. Italy's defense minister said the strikes violated international law. These are not adversaries. These are the founding members of the Western security order that America built after World War II, and they are looking at Washington right now with a mixture of alarm and something far more dangerous: doubt. Because the doubt is not just about this war. It is about the judgment of the government conducting it. It is about whether the United States can be trusted to consult its allies before making decisions that set the world on fire. It is about whether the most powerful nation on Earth is still a reliable partner or an unpredictable force that its own friends must now manage and contain. And while the Western alliance fractures, the global South is drawing its own conclusions. India has not condemned the strikes, but India has also not endorsed them. India is quietly negotiating continued access to Gulf oil through back channels, while publicly staying neutral. Turkey, a NATO member, condemned the operation. Pakistan declared a 4-day work week to cope with energy costs, while its foreign ministry issued a statement calling for an immediate ceasefire. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, none of them publicly endorsed this war. All of them are absorbing Iranian drone and missile strikes on their territory, while simultaneously being told by Washington that this is being done for their security. Saudi Arabia did not ask for this war. Qatar did not ask for this war. The UAE did not ask for this war. They are paying for it anyway, in drone strikes on their oil fields, in closed airports, in disrupted shipping lanes, in energy costs that are threatening their own economic diversification plans, the very plans that Washington has been cheering as examples of regional modernization. And every day that Iran's drones reach deeper into Gulf territory, the credibility of the American security umbrella that was supposed to prevent exactly this from happening gets thinner and thinner. Share this video right now, because this is the story that defines what comes after this war ends. Let's go deeper. Because here is the geopolitical reality that Washington refuses to say out loud. This war did not just happen at a random moment. It happened at the precise moment when American credibility was already under maximum stress. Trump had just blown up the global trading system with sweeping tariffs that alienated every major economy on Earth. He had threatened to take Greenland by force. He had suggested pulling American troops from Europe. He had publicly questioned the value of NATO. He had withdrawn from international climate agreements, international health agreements, and multiple multilateral institutions. And then, before any of those wounds had healed, he launched a unilateral war in the Middle East without UN authorization, without NATO consultation, without congressional approval, and against the explicit advice of his own intelligence community. The world was already asking whether America could be trusted as a partner, and then came the bombs. China saw the opportunity immediately. Beijing dispatched a special envoy to the Middle East within days of the first strikes. China called for an immediate ceasefire at the UN Security Council. China positioned itself as the responsible global power, the one that builds things, mediates conflicts, and respects the sovereignty of nations, in direct contrast to the image of an America that bombs countries, closes diplomatic channels, and calls the resulting chaos a short-term excursion. For every country in Africa, Asia, and Latin America watching this unfold, the contrast could not be more stark. Russia moved even faster and more strategically. Putin condemned the strikes. Putin called the killing of Iran's supreme leader a violation of international law. Putin maintained back-channel communication with Washington. Putin spoke to Gulf leaders, to Iran's president, to every regional actor simultaneously. And then Trump called Putin. Washington requested the call and came out talking about very soon instead of unconditional surrender. Putin turned one phone call into the most important diplomatic achievement of his second decade in power. Without firing a shot, without deploying a soldier, without spending a ruble, he repositioned Russia as the indispensable mediator in the most consequential conflict of 2026. And the economic dimension of America's weakened position is being documented in real time by the institutions America built. The World Economic Forum published a devastating analysis this week describing this war as a structural shock to the world economy, delivered at a moment of geoeconomic fragility, not a temporary disruption, a structural shock, the kind that reshapes investment decisions, trade routes, energy architectures, and geopolitical alignments for years. The IMF chief warned that every 10% increase in energy prices raises global inflation by nearly 0.5%. Oil is up 50% since February 28th. The math writes itself. And here is the contradiction that the World Economic Forum identified with surgical precision. The U.S. has imposed enormous costs on many of the same economies it relies on as trading and strategic partners. The damage to allied economies will complicate the coalition politics needed for post-conflict stabilization, not to mention addressing future crises elsewhere. Washington bombed its way into a strategic position where the countries it needs to rebuild what comes after this war are the same countries whose economies it has damaged in the process of fighting it. The coalition for the day after is being destroyed by the coalition for the day of. There is also the question of international law, and this question is not going away. The strikes were launched without a United Nations Security Council resolution. They were launched without a formal declaration of war from the U.S. Congress. They were launched against a country that, according to Oman's foreign minister, had just agreed to a historic nuclear deal, zero enriched uranium stockpiles, full IAEA verification, irreversible downgrade of existing material. The Omani mediator said peace was within reach. The talks were scheduled to resume on March 2nd. Trump said he was not thrilled, and on February 28th, the bombs fell. A diplomatic breakthrough was on the table, and Washington chose war. That fact, documented, sourced, confirmed by Oman's own foreign minister, is now circulating in every capital on Earth, and it is fundamentally changing the story of this war, not as a conflict of necessity, as a conflict of choice. A choice made against the advice of America's intelligence community, against the grain of ongoing diplomacy, and without the legal authorization that international norms require. UNESCO issued emergency statements about Iranian World Heritage sites bombed during this war: Golistan Palace, Nox-e-Jahan Square, the Shah Mosque in Esfahan, Chehel Sotun, sites that survived the Mongol invasions, survived centuries of conquest and revolution, reduced to rubble by American and Israeli munitions. The cultural heritage of one of the world's oldest civilizations destroyed in 2 weeks. And the world is watching and remembering. Because this is the dimension of American power that no missile can rebuild once it is lost. Not military dominance, America still has that. Not economic weight, America still has that too. The dimension that is bleeding right now is moral authority. The sense that when America acts, it acts within rules, within alliances, within the bounds of law and consultation and legitimate process. That sense, already badly damaged by Iraq, by Afghanistan, by a decade of unilateralism, is now under its most severe strain since the Vietnam War. 14 days in, the G7 declined to jointly release oil reserves, exposing a fracture at the highest level of Western economic coordination. The Global South is positioning itself between the two sides, unwilling to follow Washington into a war they were never consulted about. Russia has seized the mediator role that America abandoned the moment the first bomb fell. China is filling every diplomatic vacuum Washington left behind. America's Gulf allies are absorbing drone strikes while publicly staying silent, privately furious. UNESCO is documenting the cultural destruction. The IMF is calculating the global inflation damage. The World Economic Forum is calling it a structural shock to the world economy. And the countries that America bombed its way into defending are now the countries whose trust America must somehow rebuild before the world can begin to put this back together. America did not just launch a war against Iran on February 28th. America launched a war against its own standing in the world. And like a runway that can be repaired in 3 days, that kind of damage takes decades to fix. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think America can restore its global credibility after this war? Subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video immediately. And we will see you in the next one.